Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on is the approval of the minutes of the May 21st, 2015 board meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
I'll move approval. And I wasn't here.
Okay, so I'll second. It has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the May 21st board meeting. All in favor? Aye. Okay. The next item is public comment. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on the items that are not on the agenda. If you'd like to make a public comment, I invite you to the table at this time.
You have speakers on.
Yes, thank you. And if you would please state your name for the record.
Christine Ward. I'm with Crime Victims Action Alliance and ICANN. Good morning.
Good morning, Christine.
I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the board for the work that they're doing to really make the Victim Compensation Fund a lot more victim-friendly. We have been challenged over the years when we've been working with victims and applying for funds. And things are just getting a lot easier and are opening up more and more, so more victims are getting assistance. One of the things I was going to talk to you about today, I heard minutes ago, is being addressed, and that's the issue of letters in languages. One of our biggest challenges is that we have the applications in other languages, but then when the correspondence comes back, it's all in English. So we have clients coming to our office all the time with their letters, and we're just reading them back to them. So I understand that this is being addressed and is in the works right now, and I wanted to thank the board for the work on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank
Julie,
you very
do
much.
you want to address what we're doing on translation?
Later in our agenda, we're going to have a very comprehensive presentation for the board, the work that we're doing under our OVC grant. And what Christine is talking about is precisely one of the items that has been identified through that work, and Mindy Fox will be giving you more details about that. But I think this just demonstrates we're kind of all on the same page on this, which is very reinforcing and great for victims. We're doing the right thing here, so I appreciate the compliment.
Look forward to Mindy's presentation. Thank you very much, Christine, and we appreciate your good comments, and I'm sure this.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, good. Are there any other comments from the public today? All right, seeing none. Item number 3 is the executive officer's statement. Julie, would you please?
Yes, good morning, members. I'll be very brief this morning. As I said, really in my reports to you, I usually talk about the good work that we're doing here on an ongoing basis. And that really is going to be showcased through Mindy's presentation, which captures so much of our focus these days. Obviously, we spend a great deal of our time processing applications and bills, but you'll see the work we're doing today is really all about thinking strategically and thinking about how we can improve what we do to better meet the needs of victims. And I'm very proud of that work and anxious for you to hear about it. The only other thing I will mention is that we are now deeply engaged in our strategic planning process. We are creating a new strategic plan for our organization. We've had several meetings with the staff in kind of listening sessions so that everyone is able to participate. We are currently drafting our mission statement and finalizing a section that we're calling our values, which are really the behaviors that we believe we need to demonstrate, every day in our work, and through those behaviors, clearly demonstrate our commitment to victims. So that work continues. We will be probably finished with this around fall. Mm-hmm. So I'll be looking forward to sharing that good work with you. But again, it's been a real pleasure to see the staff come together and actively participate in kind of defining our strategic direction.
Great. Any questions of Julie?
No, thank you.
Yeah, that's terrific. Anything else, Julie?
No, I think we're ready for the contract report.
Okay. So on to number 4, item number 4 on the agenda, the contract report.
Okay, thank you. Board members, as we usually do at the June meeting, I ask for your delegation to approve items that are currently in the process, but we will not have identified a successful bidder until sometime in July. We don't have a July board meeting. I'd like not to hold up the process pending action in August. So for the items that I'll go over here in a moment, I'm asking for your delegation to approve these, and then I'll report back to you in August. Both of these contracts relate to our CARES modification project. The first one is for the, independent verification and validation services in the amount of $350,000. This is an important component of ensuring that we are absolutely on track with our work plan. This, as all contracts that I've been bringing to you recently relative to the CARES modification project, are all based upon our very close consultation with Caltech and their guidance throughout this project. The second contract is for project management support services. This is in the amount of $600,000, and again, in consultation with Caltech, will enhance our in-house project management support for the project. So I'd ask for your delegation to move forward with both of those contracts.
Okay, well, we'll need a motion for that.
I'll move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to give the executive officer of the board delegation to move forward on 2 contracts as just outlined. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you, members.
Great, and I'm very happy about this, particularly going out on the IV&V. All of this is so critical for CARES, so great.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 5, that's the legislative report, and I think, Wayne, you're going to give that to us today.
Yes, thank you. A couple of updates that are beyond the written memo that's in your file. On AB 1140, I want to point out one thing, which is during in appropriations, the bill got out of appropriations and went to the Senate desk, but in appropriations amended to increase the amount of appropriation for compensation of erroneous convictions from $100 to $130 a day. So that was added to the bill while in appropriations. AB 165, the government claims bill, has been signed by the governor. I just wanted to point out that the erroneous conviction claims of Ronald Ross, Susan Mellon, and Brian Banks are all in that bill, and those 3 will be paid, and we are expediting payment to those 3 claimants. One other thing, SB 84, which is the trailer bill on state government, has created a human trafficking victims assistance grant program to be administered by OES. The Budget Act for next year transfers $10 million from the restitution fund to the Office of Emergency Services in support of that program. Everything else, the other bills are all, the SB 518, 519, and 556 are on the Assembly desk, and our bill is on the Senate desk, waiting for assignment to policy committees.
Okay, a lot of action. All right, are any questions of Wayne regarding the legislative update?
No.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Wayne. We will now move to the Government Claims Program. The next item on the agenda is the Government Claims Program consent agenda that will be presented by Nicholas Wagner. Good morning, Mr. Wagner.
Good morning, board members. For the record, I'm Nicholas Wagner, and I will present the Government Claims Program agenda items. Item 6 is the Government Claims Consent Agenda. It consists of 324 claims. Before the board takes action on the consent agenda, Item 280 for Onca Behavioral Health, Inc. has been removed for further review. Additionally, Item 59 for Justin M. Carter, at the request of the claimant, has been removed so that the board may adjust the claim in August. Item 286 for James Quillisi has been removed so that the claimant may adjust the board today. With the exception of the removed claims, staff requests that the board approve the consent agenda.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve staff's recommendation on the consent? It's
Second.
been moved and seconded to accept staff recommendation with those items that Mr. Wagner just mentioned had been removed. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. All right, are we moving on to item number 7?
We will move on to item 286. for
286,
Mr.
I'm sorry, yeah,
Quillisi.
for Mr. Quillisi. Okay, great.
Mr. Quillisi requests leave to present a late claim for compensation from the California Highway Patrol and the Department of Motor Vehicles in an amount exceeding $25,000 for wrongful arrest and negligence. Program staff recommends the late application be denied for failure to meet the criteria required by Government Code Section 911.6. Program staff also recommends that the claim itself be rejected. Here representing himself is Mr. Quillisi, and we also have representatives for DMV and CHP. Representing DMV is Ms. Rosemary Ruggieri, and representing CHP is Sergeant Ron Wade.
Would they like to come forward and make a statement?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Please give your name.
My name is James Quillisi.
Morning, Mr. Quillisi. Would you like to make a statement at this time?
Yeah, regarding section 911.6, it states I wasn't exactly prepared for this, but I just read it last night. One of the reasons that it can be approved is, you weren't aware of the time frame in which you presented, and I wasn't aware. I stated that in my leave to present a late claim, and due to like many other factors, that's not on in the code, but my car was repoed for 30 days. Had my work in it. Well, not repoed. Impounded. My case wasn't dismissed until 212 days. So, I know I could have filed a claim earlier, but it went over the claim period of 6 months. So, I wouldn't even been able to be heard. I think that was section 945.6 that states that.
Mm-hmm.
Government code. And it states that 911.2 still applies. If I filed like day one, I got arrested. 112 days. 212 days until my case was dismissed. That's over 6 months. I know that's not in the code, but I think it has to be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your opinion on that. I'm going to now turn to Caltrans and ask you to make your statement.
CHP.
Oh, I'm sorry, CHP. Sorry. Caltrans. I'm so used to Caltrans being here. Sorry.
No problem.
Don't tell Caltrans I said that.
The California Highway Patrol and the AG's office respectfully recommend that the late application be denied for failure to meet requirements of Government Code Section 911.6.
I'm sorry, sir. Could you state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Ronald S. Wade, Jr., Sergeant, California Highway Patrol.
Thank you.
Again, the AG's office and the California Highway Patrol respectfully recommend that the late claim application be denied for failure to meet the requirements of Government Code Section 911.6. And we also respectfully request that the claim itself be denied for being complex and outside the scope of what the board normally oversees.
Yes, ma'am. Would you like to state your name for the record, please, as well?
Good morning. My name is Rosemary Ruggieri. I'm a senior staff counsel at DMV. Good morning, board members. DMV concurs with the program staff recommendation and the Attorney General's recommendation that the claim should be denied as a late claim under Government Code 911.6 for failure to meet any of those criteria.
So can I further comment? Or?
Very quickly, sir.
I mean, it wasn't discovered that I was arrested for felony DUI until March 20th, 2015. So I think that kind of changes the date of discovery of that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Any comments or questions?
I have none.
Okay, I'll accept a motion.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept staff recommendation on item number 286. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was to deny, right?
Yes. Mr. Quillisi, I'm sure staff can help you with your next steps if you ask one of the staff members. Okay. On to item number 7, the application for discharge form accountability for collection. Nicholas?
Item 7 consists of 11 requests by state agencies for discharge from accountability for collection of debt, totaling $7,181,615.78. These requests were audited by the State Controller's Office and the Attorney General's Office. When applicable, Government Claims Program staff recommends that the board approve this request.
Okay, very well.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the application for discharge form accountability. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, on to item number 8, request for delegation of the authority by the Department of General Services. Nicholas, would you like to present that too, please?
The California Department of General Services requests that the board grant it delegated authority to settle and pay or reject claims that do not exceed $1,000 each during the period of July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2018. During the previous delegation period, DGS received 18 claims. 16 claims were allowed and payments totaled $6,702.98. 2 claims were rejected. No claims are currently being processed, and the average processing time is 30 days. Program staff requests that the board approve the delegated authority.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve that request.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept staff recommendation on the delegation authority for the Department of General Services. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Nicholas, would you please present number item 9, the delegation of the authority for the Department of State Hospitals?
The California Department of State Hospitals requests that the board grant it delegated authority to settle and pay or reject claims that do not exceed $1,000 each during the period of June 19th, 2015 through June 22nd, 2017. During the previous delegation period, DSH received 83 claims. 28 claims were allowed in full and payments totaled $3,621.44. 7 claims were partially allowed and payments totaled $518.87. 37 claims were rejected and 1 claim was deemed outside the DSH jurisdiction. 10 claims are currently being processed. The average processing time for DSH during the period is 46 days. Staff recommends that the delegated authority for DSH be granted.
Thank you. Any questions?
No.
Move approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the delegation of authority by the Department of State Hospitals. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, board members.
Thank you, Nicholas. Okay, item number 10 is Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Timothy Atkins that will be presented by Chief Counsel Wayne Strumpfer. Wayne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Atkins was convicted by a jury of 1 count of murder and 2 counts of robbery stemming from a shooting death of Vicente Gonzalez on January 1, 1985. Mr. Atkins was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison in February of 1988. In 2006, he filed a writ of habeas corpus based mainly on a recanting witness. The Los Angeles County Superior Court granted the writ. LADA declined to retry the case, and Mr. Atkins was released from prison on February 9, 2007, after serving 7,137 days in incarceration. This matter first came to the board in March of 2010 when the board denied Mr. Atkins' original claim. After a writ and appeal by Mr. Atkins of that decision, the Court of Appeals remanded the case to us with orders to conduct a new hearing and issue a new decision. This was ordered because the court found that the board, through verbal comments, made additional credibility determinations against Mr. Atkins and other witnesses that were not reflected in the hearing officer's proposed decision. So therefore, the written proposed decision did not reflect the board's final ruling. While this matter was on appeal, Mr. Atkins returned to Los Angeles County Superior Court and received a finding of factual innocence from a judge in August of 2014. The issues raised today with Mr. Atkins' claim are: 1, what law applies to this case, Penal Code 4900 through 4904 as it was in 2010 or as it is written today, and 2, has Mr. Atkins met his burden to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that he is innocent of the crimes for which he was incarcerated. The proposed decision determines that the changes to Penal Code Section 4900 to 4904 were not retroactive, and therefore the law was in effect in 2010, rules the board's decision today. Furthermore, the proposed decision finds that the additional facts that the Superior Court finding last year of Mr. Atkins' factual innocence and the eyewitness testimony of Maria Gonzalez being unreliable is Alex Simpson of the Innocence Project, and appearing for the Attorney General is Kenneth Sokler.
Thank you, Wayne. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Though you've been introduced by Wayne, I'd like you to introduce yourself, if you would, for the record, sir.
Kenneth Sokler for the Attorney General.
Alex Simpson, Associate Director of the California Innocence Project, appearing on behalf of Mr. Atkins.
Thank you. Could you please make your statement?
Thank you, and good morning, board members.
Morning.
This, Mr. Strumpfer, I think, excellently reduced years of litigation on this case, and he is absolutely correct that this claim comes before the board again after a prior determination. And there were a number of proceedings that succeeded that determination, the most important of which, I believe, was, as discussed in the proposed decision, the determination not just by a judge in the Superior Court finding Timothy Atkins innocent by a preponderance of the evidence, but the judge who heard the original trial and reversed the conviction. That judge, Michael Tynan, had the opportunity to review everything in the case and was, without question, the best person to make a determination as to whether or not Timothy Atkins was innocent by a preponderance of the evidence. Excuse me. Last year, Judge Tynan considered the case again, this time not from the perspective of whether the prosecution had proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, as the judge had presided over the original trial, nor whether Timothy Atkins was entitled to reversal of his conviction, but from the perspective of whether Timothy Atkins had established that he was innocent by a preponderance of the evidence, as stated in Section 1485. Association and from Mr. Sokler from the Attorney General's office, the court came to the conclusion I think my point is that the judge had every opportunity to determine decision such that Judge Tynan's analysis was in some way more circumscribed than what this board's determination is. But that's simply not true. The court had the opportunity to hear from all of the parties before it made its decision. And we argued the case exhaustively before Judge Tynan. Now we have a finding from a sitting Superior Court judge. That finding says that Tim is innocent under the same standard this board has to make, whether Timothy Atkins is innocent by a preponderance of the evidence. That's what makes this hearing different from the prior hearing in, I believe it was 2010. We may disagree about whether 1485.55 is binding on this board or whether it is merely persuasive, the finding of innocence, but I think under either analysis, the difference is this finding. I think that Timothy Atkins has the right to claim compensation for his years, more than 20 years of wrongful incarceration. And I ask this board to make that recommendation.
Okay, thank you, sir. The AG, please present.
Good morning again, board members. We agree with the hearing officer's conclusion that the new provisions enacted in January 2014 don't apply to this case. Where we disagree is on the effect of Judge Tynan's 2014 ruling. When this case was last heard before the board in March 2015, it did not appear as if the board regarded it as a particularly close case. The case was sent back by the Court of Appeal, however, for one reason and one reason only, which was that the board had not accompanied its decision with the requisite written findings. The only other thing of potential significance that has happened since the last hearing is Judge Tynan's finding of last August under Section 1485.55. And the question before the board is whether that decision changes anything, whether that decision is so persuasive that the board should reach a different conclusion than it reached in 2010. And I would submit that while the board can and should look at the judge's decision, it is not persuasive and doesn't carry the weight to cause the board to change its decision. Most significantly, Judge Tynan considered a different question than that before the board. Judge Tynan, in deciding the innocence claim, limited himself to the evidence that had been presented at trial and to the evidence which he had previously heard at the habeas corpus hearing. And he made a comment on page 21 of the transcript of that hearing saying he wasn't considering the evidence because he had decided this case already on habeas corpus. The issue before the board is whether Mr. Atkins has proven his claim based on the trial evidence, the habeas evidence, and all the additional evidence that was presented to the board in 2009 and 2010 in the 4900 hearing. There was significant additional evidence presented in this proceeding that Judge Tynan did not consider. Some of that evidence was discussed explicitly in March 2010 at this board meeting. It included Atkins' own statement to the police shortly after the crime, in which he placed himself a couple of minutes walk away from the murder at the to him right after the murder and said they had just done a move. It also, the evidence that Judge Tynan didn't consider also included Evans' own statement to the police in which he admitted being with Atkins on the night of the murder. And to regress a bit, Atkins had also admitted to the police that he had spent part of the night of the murder in the company of co-defendant Evans. And that was significant because in addition to identifying Mr. Atkins as one of the assailants, the surviving victim, Maria Gonzalez, had identified Ricky Evans from a photo six-pack. Another item that was presented to this board that Judge Tynan didn't consider was the statement of Mr. Atkins' cousin, Lee Dewberry, who had stated to police that on December 31st or January 1st, this crime occurred on New Year's Eve, he had seen Mr. Atkins in possession of a necklace. That was significant because Maria Gonzalez had testified that Mr. Atkins ripped a necklace from her neck during the robbery. So it corroborated her identification. Additionally, one other item that the board appeared to consider significant at the last meeting was the statement of the confidential jailhouse informant who had made a statement about an admission that Mr. Atkins made to him in jail. That statement was notable because it included numerous accurate details of the crime, including the color and make of the victim's car, the location where the crime occurred, the kinds of weapons used, the fact a necklace was taken, and I think most significantly, the fact that the murder victim, Vicente Gonzalez, was chubby. While informant statements are looked at very carefully, this informant had numerous accurate details about the crime. He also related Atkins. He said he had these conversations while they were waiting to go to be transported to court. He also related accurately Atkins' statements about what had happened on those court dates, which was the preliminary hearing in which Denise Powell had testified against Atkins. So as the board appeared to find at the previous hearing, the informant statements were also quite persuasive, and they were not considered by Judge Tynan, who limited his consideration to the evidence presented at the habeas hearing and at trial. So the way we see it, Judge Tynan's decision isn't legally binding on this court, and it's not persuasive because it didn't consider the full range of evidence. Moreover, it didn't tell the board anything that the board was unaware of in 2010. When the board decided this case in 2010, it was well aware that Judge Tynan found Denise Powell's recantation to be credible and that Judge Tynan didn't ascribe much weight to the eyewitness identification by Maria Gonzalez. But the board seemed to reach different conclusions as reflected in the board's comments, and for good reason, we believe. So for these reasons, we believe that nothing significant has changed since the board previously rejected this claim, and the board should again reject it based on the wide scope of evidence that has been presented in this proceeding. Thank you.
You. Well, one thing has changed. I'm a new board member. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question for the Council for the Innocence Project. Good to see you again.
And you as well, Mr. Ramos.
The hearing that was conducted in front of the judge in L.A. County, you indicated it was the Los Angeles County District Attorneys Association that was present. Was it the trial lawyer or just representing the DA's office?
It was in 2007.
Okay, but not the actual attorney that did the trial.
I don't know that person was still available. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
I'm in an 85 trial. I don't even know if they were still a DA.
Okay. It was a member of their habeas unit.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so it's their appellate unit in my office, what it would be. Okay.
This is just a curiosity of me. Was the gold necklace ever entered in as evidence in the case, in the original trial?
I don't
No.
believe so.
I don't believe it was ever
It
recovered.
was just talked about. It
Yes,
was never
and it was
presented as evidence.
referred to in police reports and talked about.
Okay.
If it helps to specify, there wasn't any evidence that Miss Gonzalez described a necklace or the necklace, and that Lee Dewberry's comments also matched that description or anything like that.
It was just a curiosity that I had in reading the case. Okay. Any other questions? All right. I will accept a motion.
Trying to figure out the
You've got
Robert's Rules of Order. So we make a motion. We oppose staff's recommendation.
Second the motion.
It is seconded that we reject staff's recommendation. Is there any discussion?
Yes. Let me give you my analysis and why I feel that way. And believe me, did a lot of work on this case for several days, as I discussed with Wayne before the hearing, and great work by all of the attorneys involved, the Innocence Project, the Attorney General staff, both of the highest integrity that work in this state of California, and of course the Los Angeles District Attorneys Association that I have much respect for as well. We as prosecutors take this very serious and are seeking justice to not only hold the guilty accountable, but protect the innocent. As I went through the issues, the first two issues, I will agree with, I think everybody agrees that the factual innocence is not binding upon this board. However, it should give us great persuasion and weight to our analysis that we have back in front of us again, and it does. I have a lot of respect for the bench. I have a lot of respect for the DA's office that was there in their appellate unit and the Attorney General's office that was there. I also understand the limitations that were placed on the judge, whether or not they were placed on him specifically by himself or others or the appellate process, but he was the trial judge, which is huge, habeas corpus, which was huge, but did not have the opportunity to view and see what we have seen on the board, the additional evidence presented here after this individual was convicted, and I should say by a jury trial. I don't believe it was a bench trial, and if I'm mistaken by that, please let me know.
No, that's correct.
Okay, so you have 12 citizens that we have a justice system that we put the evidence before them, and they found this individual guilty. Now, I understand now the second issue is the presumption of innocence, and the preponderance of evidence is a different standard than the jury trial had beyond a reasonable doubt, a lower standard. So I go back through everything, and I'm not going to rephrase and restate what I said in the original hearing because I still feel that about what was indicated in the original hearing, but I don't want to go outside the bounds of the factors that we have presented before us at the hearing officer because I don't want this coming back for those issues. But in looking at those statements, I still feel the same way regarding the statements. And then one thing that actually stood out for me, and when I have these very difficult decisions, I always lean towards the victims. We have a victim that has been murdered. We have the wife that was there at the time her husband was shot and murdered, who suffered a significant emotional event, and it could be argued both ways regarding identification of the suspect. But here's what I can't get past. You have Denise Powell, who indicated this defendant was part of the murder. She goes to the preliminary hearing, testifies, she tells everybody she's scared, and then she leaves. And we don't have her testimony in trial, which could have been cross-examined. I'm not going to get into the issues of how hard they tried to look for her, but I'm going to guess you don't present in front of a judge that you couldn't find a witness when you really didn't do everything you could to find that witness. But here's the situation. You have this individual that right after the murder says this is the person that was involved in the murder. And you have Mrs. Gonzalez, the victim, who the next day identifies him in a photo lineup. She didn't talk to Denise Powell. They're in different worlds. Denise Powell grew up in this whole different environment. She is the victim. And she cried when she saw his picture, and she has never, ever said that was not the person. So the odds of that occurring are absolutely tremendous to me. How is it that our victim identified the same person, that this individual who truly testified in court under oath said he was the one that was involved in the murder? Now, people may say, well, you have the identification expert. I get that. They are very good at what they do, and they have been in the past. What concerned me about this identification expert, which is in the records, is he didn't bother to interview Mrs. Gonzalez, the victim, and or look at the photo lineup himself. He talked about generalities and the concept of the problems with witness identification. So for those reasons, I still believe that the burden hasn't been proved, that he has proved himself innocent in this situation. And I will, again, reiterate that I am and I have to give staff a ton of credit. They did a great job on this case. That I oppose staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Ricky?
No.
I have a couple comments. I found Judge Tynan's arguments and decision very persuasive. I had some questions about the situation of the eyewitnesses and the testimony of the, what were called, I think at times, unreliable witnesses. So therefore, I did accept Judge Tynan's arguments. I have some concerns about Mrs. Gonzalez's selection of the picture and what picture she was looking at. I believe there was a question about the picture that was provided in the six-pack, I think it's called, whether it was a picture of Mr. Atkins taken when he was 13. So I was somewhat persuaded by, even though I agree with Mr. Ramos that the expert witness on the reliability of eyewitnesses did not interview Mrs. Gonzalez, but I do understand and have some appreciation for the questions of an eyewitness when they're under the kind of emotional distress that Mrs. Gonzalez obviously was, and the difficulty in how she first identified the said murderer in terms of height and weight and whether the crime scene was illuminated properly. I know the police report said it was, but there's enough doubt there that I have some real concerns about her testimony and that of Ms. Bell as well. So I was, as I said earlier, not to repeat myself, I was persuaded by the judge, the original, and in that he was the original judge. I think that's has some incredible weight for me as well. And I was not persuaded by the argument set forth by the Attorney General's office. But I have no further questions. So is there any other discussion on the motion to reject or not accept, I guess, not accept the staff recommendation? Okay. All in favor of the motion that's before us not to accept staff recommendation on the victim's compensation case of Timothy Atkins, government claims board, excuse me, government claims case of Timothy Atkins?
Aye.
No.
No.
Thank you all very much.
For clarification, what we'll need to do to make sure the record is correct this time is to rewrite the proposed decision based on the court's decision, or I'm sorry, on the board's decision, and bring it back to you in August for verification of that. And as I understand it, the board just voted 2-1 to reject the staff's recommendation, but the vote was to find that the old law applies and that Mr. Atkins has not met his burden to prove innocence. Is that correct?
That was my motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members.
Thank you.
Okay. This closes the claims portion of our meeting. We will now move to the Victims' Compensation Program portion of our agenda. The next item is a presentation of the baseline data mentioned before, needs assessment and gap analysis report pursuant to the Office of Victims of Crime Capacity Initiative and Technology Grant, an information item that will be presented by Mindy Fox. Good morning, Mindy.
Good morning, Madam
Morning.
Chair and board members. Is that on? Is that okay?
Before Mindy begins, just kind of a little setting of the stage here, as I mentioned in my report. We have had numerous conversations at the board about kind of how much is going on in the whole field of victims' rights and victim services. A couple of months ago, we had a panel discussion about delivery systems for victim services, and we heard from representatives of family justice centers, and we heard from representatives of trauma recovery centers. In addition to the kind of evolution of those two service delivery models, we also have the Office of Victims of Crime at the national level issuing their Vision 21 strategic direction, their commitment to examining new ways and better ways for compensation programs to be able to identify and meet the needs of victims. And as you note, we have been successful in competing and being granted more than one grant for studies in this area. Also, out in the field, we have other new things occurring. The passage of Proposition 47, which will result in estimated fairly significant amounts of additional revenue flowing to the restitution fund for the prescribed purpose of granting funds for trauma recovery centers throughout California. I think we're still dealing with the outcomes of realignment and the potential impact of that on restitution collections across the state. You have our own statute modernization bill that Wayne talked about going through the legislature, and of course the health of the restitution fund, such that we're able to support the human trafficking initiative that's in the governor's budget for his consideration. So that's all way of kind of backdrop of why the work we're doing for OVC is so very important, and the role that this board plays in speaking on behalf of the state for victims' rights and services. So today, as I mentioned earlier, Mindy's going to report to you on the work that we've been doing under these grants for OVC and the recommendations that are naturally coming out of this very methodically done study. These are not just impressions. These are victims and providers giving us the benefit of their direct involvement with victims and helping us really grasp what the challenges and barriers are to victims being able to access the assistance that we can provide. And so Mindy, in this presentation, will be talking about specific actions that we are recommending to OVC that they share with other states, but that we ourselves are now implementing as part of year 2 of this grant. My intent is to help you engage in a conversation today about some of those recommendations, hopefully to give us your direction on how you would like to proceed on some of those, where it's clear that in order for us to implement some of these suggestions, we would need the board's endorsement and action on those items. And then in August, we'll come back again for further discussion and give you the opportunity, based on what direction you may give us today, to take action on selected items. All of this then leads up to the summit on victims services that we're planning for the month of November, early November, as part of really the wrap-up of our 50th anniversary year. So that summit will bring together policymakers and victim advocates and other stakeholders to really talk again about the future of victim services and what more we can do collectively to meet their needs. So that's kind of the package. And what you'll hear today is a very significant piece of factual data that you'll hopefully be able to embrace and advocate for. And we invite our stakeholders to engage with us Next week, I'll be meeting with our advisory committee and briefing them. Hopefully, some of them are actually listening and watching to this presentation today. We'll be getting their input and their comments and their suggestions on these recommended actions. So we envision this to be a very collaborative process, all focusing, of course, on doing the best we can to meet the needs of victims in California. So
Great,
with that,
that's helpful.
Thank
Okay,
you,
Mindy.
Julie. Good morning.
I'm going to have my back to you
Okay,
all, I think.
sorry, yes, you need to turn around, I think. So, for the record, I'm Mindy Fox, Deputy Executive Officer for the Government Claims and Victim Compensation Programs, and I'm happy to be here today to provide an update on the 3 grants we've been awarded by the Office for Victims of Crime. And the first is the Compensation Initiative Grant. It is a 3-year program, so there will be a 3rd year coming in October. It's a federal fiscal year cycle. And then we also were awarded the Building State Technology Capacity Grant. So we are actually juggling 3 at once with a 4th to come. I will try to be brief. There is a great depth of work and effort behind these 3 grants, so I'll highlight the salient points, the findings, the recommendations, and I'll try not to get too into the weeds. Stop me if I go there, okay? The first one I'll do a brief overview on is what we call Year 1 of the Compensation Initiative Grant. We are awarded roughly $245,000 back in October 2013. And in this grant, we promised to OVC that we would identify the underserved crime victims in California, identify the barriers that preclude them from accessing compensation and other victim services, really try to drill into what are their unmet needs, and identify strategies to improve access, improve awareness, better meet those needs. So we bit off a lot, and we are proud to have completed this work and really have qualitative and quantitative data that now provides us evidence upon which we can draw conclusions. And this actually was a first, by the way, in California. There had been no comprehensive study to identify who are the underserved victims of crime. So there were 4 deliverables in that first grant: baseline data, needs assessment, and gap analysis reports, and an implementation plan. And I will do a quick overview of the progress of each. The purpose of that baseline data report is to document and analyze California compensation, demographic, and crime statistics. And we took a very deep data dive into our compensation statistics. We grounded our baseline study in the crime year 2010. So for any applications that were submitted for crimes that occurred in 2010, they made it into our analysis. And we now have a filing period of 3 years, so that encompassed 3 years worth of applications for 2010 crimes. And then we really looked at demographic and crime stats. And looking at the crime stats gets rather complicated because there's 2 different data sources on the state and national level that actually don't sync up beautifully. So we really had to do very precise calculations and statistics to draw our conclusions from.
How many applications were, you said you're back into a 5-year, how many applications?
For crimes that occurred in 2010, it was roughly 52,000 apps, roughly.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, and on average, we run anywhere from 50 to 55,000 applications received per year. Yeah, it's a workload. So the methodology for this baseline data report is that we analyzed the data from the apps with the crimes that occurred in 2010. We looked at the crime rates and the demographics. And then the big deal was we compared that reported crime rate with the compensation and application statistics. And the results of all that, we call it the claimant rate. Research showed that statewide, we receive applications for 17.5% for all forcible rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults, and homicides. And that gets to the national statistics and how they track crime and California kind of thing. This calculation is called the claimant rate, or that's what we're referring it to. And it's a very useful statistic because we're using it to look at all of the counties across California and who is above and below that 17.5%. And by the way, we dialogue a lot. Julie had mentioned NACVCB, the National Association of Crime Victims Compensation Boards. We dialogue a lot with their association president, and he's been keeping track of this claimant rate for decades. And they typically look at those that submit compensation apps across the nation for medical needs. We know in California we pay for a lot more than medical needs, but the national average is down in the 5%. So he has been really quite impressed with our rate of applications per crime and population, but it gets a little more complex than that, but I thought I should provide that context. So then we looked at the counties across the state and compared it to that 17.5% statewide average. And there are 16 counties with claimant rates below 17.5. And those 16 counties comprise 59% of California's total population. And 6 counties comprise more than half the state's total population. And those 6 counties all are below the 17.5% rate. And you know, Sacramento is one of them. And this is really illuminating and could be incredibly meaningful because we can now drill into these 6 counties that have 50% of the California residents, identify the underserved communities, and actively work with the community-based organizations, the system-based advocates, et cetera, to really reach the underserved in those counties. The converse is also true. There are several counties, 17 counties to be precise, that were at 33% or more in their claimant rate stats. And we can look to them for best practices. What is working? Why are they getting so many applications per the reported crime and per their population base? And we can share those best practices and set up models, that kind of thing.
We know what the study has identified.
Yes, the study has identified those also. And then there's a handful that belong to the category that are below the 17.5, and they kind of are a subset that fall into rural and frontier counties, and they have some of their own challenges. So further on, we'll drill into some of our recommended strategies based on the kind of challenges identified with this kind of claimant rate. So what we also learned with our baseline data analysis is that for crimes that occurred in 2010 and applications were submitted for those, 82% of those applications were allowed. Of those 82%, 51% of those applications then had bills submitted. So that means 49% of the allowed applications did not have bills submitted. That is really meaningful, and it completely begs questions, why not, and what should we do about that? And we have theories and we have suggestions. And of the bills that were submitted, the 51% out of the 82, nearly all of those were allowed, indicating that as a claimant gets assistance when they have an allowed app and submit bills, they're pretty on target. They meet eligibility requirements for paying bills, and that's a good success story. So the second deliverable is the needs assessment report. And I've mentioned this in prior board meetings. We were in contract with the Warren Institute on Law and Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley. And they did some interviews with advocates, service providers, and victims. CalVCP staff surveyed community-based organizations, government agencies, and mental health providers, and we both conducted our literature review. And the point of all this was to get a lot of feedback about what challenges exist, what are the barriers to accessing and using compensation and other services, and really highlight who are the underserved victims of crime. And so to cut a very long story short, here I have 2 slides showing who the underserved crime victim communities in California are as a result of all this research. Actually, I'll back up there so everybody can take that in. Tribal communities, people with disabilities, people who are homeless, victims of human trafficking, communities affected by gang violence, LGBT and queer and questioning, immigrants, and there's some subset of those also, elderly being defined as 65 years and over, people who suffer from mental illness, people with limited English proficiency, persons of Asian Pacific Islander descent, and residents of rural or frontier counties. And there's some definitions about how one is defined as a frontier county.
Are those in any order?
No. Thanks for asking that. They were in a visually pleasing order. This chart, we have many, many charts. This needs assessment report is a 75-page document full of quantitative analysis charts. This one is instrumental in depicting feedback from the community-based organizations and the mental health providers. And the horizontal axis shows needs that victims described to those providers that are not being met. And what it really shows is of the people giving us feedback, 94% of organizations surveyed reported their clients had unmet financial needs. 88% reported their clients had unmet mental health needs. 86% reported their clients had unmet housing needs. 81% reported their clients had unmet medical needs. And there's a few other categories. And we'll discuss these needs in future slides here. The needs assessment report also identified barriers based on all the feedback. And this was relative to both compensation and services because they go so hand in hand. So the first one mentioned, Christine Ward spoke about it this morning. It is well documented that we need compensation information in a variety of languages. And I'll shortcut to a future slide that we're making great strides in that. We've got a contractor. That's all good news. But it's obvious that they need the application and the letters in the language that they can read so they know if they were even allowed or denied or what to do next. And up until really recently, we only had our app in Spanish and English. And 43% of Californians speak a language other than English at home, 43%. And there's been a decline in the number of system-based advocates, those that are in the criminal justice system in the DA's office, over the past decade. That's documented. We feel that because the advocates provide that human connection, that hand-to-hand touch, filling out the application, helping them through the system. 72% of the crime victims from the 2010 data said they were represented by advocates from a local victim witness center. That's a high percentage, and it shows how actively we are synced up with them and need to be.
How many languages do we now have? Because you said previously it was English and Spanish.
12.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll get to a slide showing which ones were selected. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Another barrier identified by providers and advocates is the lack of ongoing, frequent training and technical support. And this would enhance their assistance to victims of crime, there's no doubt. 62% of the respondents stated that training on how to better access CalVCP would be very, very helpful. And survey respondents and interviewees also expressed the need for an online application. It is currently not possible to submit an application, a comp app to us online, and we'll talk more about that. That's that third grant we have. The third deliverable is a gap analysis report, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We compared the results of the baseline data and needs assessment reports to determine gaps in services and compensation. And these findings are very consistent with, they're based on what came out of those two reports. So it basically synthesized the findings. And these are all issues that I've gone over. The topic of language as a barrier was a very consistent theme. 1 in 5 Californians have limited English proficiency. VCP must provide our compensation materials in a variety of languages, and we are doing so, and our outreach materials to increase awareness. Community-based organizations helping underserved communities need ongoing training and tools to help victims connect with services in their community and to us. And because 43% of the California population speaks other than language at home, they need help in their community, the resources they're going to that are in their own language and culturally competent. And there is definite lack of that, especially in the rural and frontier counties. There's not necessarily even enough quantity of the service providers, much less in a variety of languages. Additional findings from that gap analysis is we really can enhance our collaboration with community-based organizations, advocates, providers, law enforcement. I will get to how we're doing that. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Fear was a very consistent theme that came up in all the surveys, in the interviews. It's not a new topic for any of us. Fear is a key reason why victims don't seek services or apply for comp. It could be fear of retaliation, law enforcement, deportation, or blame, shame, any of those. But they all prevent victims from receiving services and applying for compensation. And then there was a 2013 report by the Public Policy Institute of California. They reported that in a statewide survey, 57% of Californians go online from their cell phones, and more than half go online to access government services. Again, this points to the need for a more, modern use of technology, online app, that kind of thing. So here's the findings, and this starts to speak to what Julie was foreshadowing here. These are the specific kinds of enhanced benefits that we could make decisions to put in place. Relocation was consistently shared by all victims that had that need. Victims, it's not uncommon for them to relocate for reasons of safety or emotional well-being, and that benefit limit was set at $2,000 in the year 2000, and for 15 years it has not changed. So it is clearly not kept up with the cost of living, rent, security deposits, and all that have gone up. And victims and providers have consistently reported that funeral and burial benefits are inadequate to cover the actual costs. According to a National Funeral Director Association report in 2012, so it's gone up since then, the median cost of a funeral with a casket was over $7,000, but our benefit is currently capped with a regulation at $5,000, though statute allows us to go up to $7,500. Transportation benefits. These are allowed in many other states. We don't do much of this in California, but we certainly have the permission by OVC to do so. They're not covered. The kind of things that people spoke of is paying for transportation so victims can get to actual services, such as a medical appointment, a mental health service treatment appointment, going to court, going to get legal assistance to get a restraining order, that kind of thing. And then other unmet needs include costs to obtain and serve a restraining order, other kind of legal services, or even paying for child care so they can get to all those kinds of appointments. So the fourth deliverable in this first-year grant is an implementation plan. And we are stating this in this implementation plan, everything I just did the high-level review of. Who are the underserved? How do we help them increase access? What barriers can we just remove? And how do we better meet those needs? And here are the key strategies that have emerged. And none of them are earth-shaking, but all of them are very doable, and there's really solid feedback and research showing that these can be effective, and we are now in the process of implementing them. So they're collaboration, translation, e-learning, conferences, changes to policies and statutes, and online access. And I'll try to briefly give you the update as to what are we doing in each of those, which segues us into my status about year 2, which is where we are right now for this compensation grant. For year 2, we got $400,000, and that was quite a compliment from the Federal Office for Victims of Crime. They called us and said, ask for more, we think you deserve it, need it, and we'll use it. So, and there's only 3 states are awarded these. So the goal of this plan, of this entire year, is to implement those strategies identified in year 1. And so high-level review of what are we doing across those 5 key topics. We are drafting a collaboration plan, and this is something that we've promised OVC that could be a replicable plan for other states to use. VCGCB has done a lot of this very well, but this is putting it all in one place, kind of like a toolkit and with a menu and laying it all out. So we are leveraging partnerships with community-based organizations. There are thousands of CBOs across the state that work with victims, and we can really use them to cross-message, carry our water, that kind of thing. We should strengthen relationships with traditional partners. We work with Intertribal Council. We work with Board of Behavioral Science. We can do more with them. We can work with Covered California. They can get our compensation, app up on their website, vice versa. And ACA definitely plays into some trends we're witnessing. And we're going to disseminate education tools such as toolkits, law enforcement video, a quick little video, that kind of thing. The second one I spoke about is the application has been translated into these 12 languages, in addition to English, of course, and we have triaged the dozens of letters that go out to claimants in response to their application and their bills, and they are currently being translated into these languages. And up until now, you could get a deny letter. Your application has been denied, and if you could not speak or read English and you didn't have help, you did not know you were denied. So this clearly can increase our response to claimants and kind of our relationships back and forth.
So this answers Christine's concern? Yeah. Okay, good.
And I guess I should mention we're in contract with the federal funds, with the contractor who this is underway. We are developing 5 e-learning courses. 2 of them are for advocates. One will be for system-based. The second will be for community-based, medical providers, mental health providers, and the general public. And basically, these will be interactive, engaging online courses available 24/7. It is 2015. This is a great way to educate our variety of stakeholders. There will be assessments built into it, and eventually we'll have the capability to do certificates, keep track of registration, build databases off of it. The possibilities are limitless. We are hosting 2 regional conferences with the title of Strategic Collaborations for Reaching Underserved Victims of Crime. You can see one in Davis in September. The Southern California will be at UCLA in October. And we are finalizing our agendas right now. The tracks are shaping up beautifully, as are the speakers. Topics include innovative strategies to reach marginalized populations, making the criminal justice system accessible to underserved victims, and breaking down barriers to accessing CalVCP benefits. I hope you're all available, and we'll get this on your calendars. And then I think this is the second to last one. Some of this clearly may need changes to internal policies. It may need changes to regs, statutes, but they're all the things that I mentioned in prior slides. And as Julie mentioned, we can talk about some of that today. We will be back in August. We intend to actually come back in August with an agenda item about relocation and funeral burial at a minimum. And then the last one, I thought I was done, but there's that third grant here. This segues, the feedback of everything I've just summarized indicated the need for an online access system. That's why we were then awarded the Building State Technology Capacity Grant. These funds will not build online access. These funds are being used to conduct the planning process that any state department needs to do to get an IT project through the approval gates. So we have hired a contractor with these funds. We are underway. And the deliverables are to do I can never get this word out, a replicable plan for other states, because the planning of an online access system or any IT project, if you do your planning well, then that probably increases your odds of success, and other states can mimic our effort. And then when we wrote and were awarded the grant, it talked about feasibility study report, BCPs. Now we're talking in terms of the IT gates, stage 1 business analysis, stage 2 administrative analysis, I think it's called. So we are planning on going through the 4 gates, and if they are approved by Caltech and such, then we will put out a solicitation for the solution provider. We know we aren't guaranteed doing that. We need to go through these stages.
And stage 1 and 2 are now live, by the way, for
Yeah.
the Department of Technology.
Yeah. and we're making nice progress on that stage when the S1BA, by the way.
Good.
So, as mentioned, we've already selected our consultant. The engagement plan is a document that will depict who is interviewed. There'll be a series of focus groups with all those stakeholders, because the online access system, it's for advocates, victims, law enforcement, providers. We hope for a seamless transmittal of crime reports with this. That would speed things up immensely. On average, it takes 23 days for us to receive a crime report. The outlying number is 59 days. If we could do that online, our processing just speeds up like that. We want victims and advocates to be able to apply online, of course. We'd love providers to check the status of their bills. Our calls to customer service would drop dramatically. So that engagement plan is all about who do they interview, what are all those focus groups, and then they have to describe how does it work for them right now, how should it. And they have to document that current as-is process, all that IT stuff they do in the requirements. Uh-oh, did I lose my...
Bring that back in.
I'm not moving forward here. Thank you. So, in conclusion, this work has allowed us to identify who the underserved victims in California are, what are their barriers and their unmet needs, and documents strongly suggested strategies and solutions. And I'm very pleased we've made this progress. I feel like we have quantitative and qualitative data that allows us to draw these conclusions, and we are on very solid ground. Can you help me, Tish?
John, to the rescue.
We're really near the end. Oh. Okay, so as Julie said, what's next? We have an advisory committee meeting next week. I am sure we'll get a lot of feedback and input from them. Welcome ideas, need to hear what our stakeholders, our advisors would like to voice. And then we'll be back in August at a minimum with an update for you about the state of the restitution fund, because all of this is related to spending money. And an action item about changes such as funeral, burial, taking it. If we repeal the regulation that limits us to $5,000, we can use the existing statute that allows us to go up to $7,500, which is consistent with, was that a Hancock bill, Wayne? Or
Yes, consistent
yeah.
with SB 519.
Yeah. So we're synced up on that one pretty nicely. And we're doing the analysis about upping reload to catch up with the cost of living. And we are happy to bring back, based on any direction, future initiatives. There's, as Julie mentioned, talk about family justice centers. We know that TRCs and possibility more money around Prop 47, that's coming our way possibly. And then it does culminate with the California Crime Victim Services Summit in November.
Yeah.
So that's it, unless you have questions.
Wow, that's tremendous.
I just want to make a comment, or
Sure.
please. Great work, and I will tell you, I love that you did a needs assessment plan and program statewide. As you can see, we struggle in my county for all the different issues you talked about, the underserved. The demographics in my county, it's one of the largest, well, it is the largest geographically in the United States. We go to Nevada, Arizona, and our Hispanic population and Spanish-speaking population is huge. And when you talk about fear, I'm meeting with a new consulate from Mexico about that, because the victims are afraid to show up and come to court because they think they're going to be deported. But we constantly are looking at ways and best practices, so my staff will very much love what you are going to be doing, and we will be there at the table. But it is a constant battle, and I love that you're talking about technology, and we implemented an automated system to notify victims, but then you discover in my county that victims don't always have the technology themselves to get the automated notifications or whatever. So it's an ongoing issue. I think this is great that we're taking a look at this, and that your leaders in the nation really in this area as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's just incredible. And the amount of data that you have is, we're going to be interesting to sort of in in the open data effort that we're making
Right.
out of GovOps, it might be interesting to
Yeah,
see if
it's
we
a wealth
can
of information.
utilize your data in a way that it makes it very accessible to the public for variety of uses. But what are the frontier counties? I know what the rural counties are. What are the frontier counties?
I don't know if I can do that off the top of my head. Things like Plumas, Mono. Robin, are you back
I'd
there?
say those are rural. Anyway,
That's
it was just a
Lassen.
curiosity.
Okay.
Lassen. And they're spread out with not dense population.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Madam Chair, before we close, I just want to publicly thank Mindy as the project leader on this, and two key people, Robin Fommelby and Christy Munson, who have
Your arms up, ladies,
yes,
so we can
please take
see
a bow.
you.
They've done a
Hey.
tremendous amount of work culling through all of this information and putting it together in a way that we can all really, grasp and see the
And
possibilities.
getting things to sync up, getting the federal statistics, that is so hard to get apples to apples. and
Right.
get
So
those
we will be
comparisons made.
submitting these documents to OVC as part of our grant agreement, and then we will probably post them on our website and make them available to all of our stakeholders.
That's just great. I may think of some more audiences for Mindy to present to.
Be
Julie.
great. We'd love to get out
'Cause
there and
this is-
share.
You should celebrate this and have it widely after you bring the task force together and all of those comments, because this is just great stuff that people should know about. So thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.
That's
you.
terrific. Okay, no other questions of Mindy? Great. The board will now convene into closed session pursuant to Government Code 11126C3 to discuss numbers 1 through 84. I think. My damn knee is getting so bad. I think maybe one more before I have to